Howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Tonight, because it is an evening video, you can see the lights on behind me, we're going to set up VirtualBox to get ready to install a multitude of virtual Linux machines so that we can test them and play around with them. So without further ado, let's get the video started. So as you can see here on the screen, I have quite a few Linux machines already set up, but I'm going to show you. Now this is how I set it up for my Linux machines. I'm running on a AMD Ryzen 5 processor. I've got 16 gig of RAM. I've got a couple of SSD drives in this computer, and then I also have a regular spinning drive, a 1 terabyte drive that I kind of use as my scratch disk, and it's where I house virtual machines. So I'm going to be setting mine up according to those specs. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to show you how to set up a base machine. Now, I don't necessarily set up my virtual machines so that I can have more than one running at a time. I tend to give my virtual machines as many cores, quad cores, 4 cores, and about 4 gig of RAM to start up. So I don't know that you'll be running multiple machines in that kind of configuration. You may want to skimp a little bit more on the CPUs or the RAM, but your mileage might vary. So keep that in mind when you see me creating these virtual machines. I'm doing it based on my use case scenario, not on yours. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have VirtualBox Manager installed, VM, and also make sure that you have the add-ons included with your VirtualBox. You have to add them as an afterthought. So there's 2 pieces to download: the VM VirtualBox Manager, and then the add-on extensions, or you won't get USB 2 and 3 support. So keep that in mind. So I'm just going to come over here to the blank area of the screen. I'm going to go New, and I'm going to call it Unky Joe's Linux. Now, the program is kind of intuitive. It knows you're going to install some form of Linux. If I were to type Ubuntu, let's see what happens. Let's try a little experiment. Unky Joe's Ubuntu Linux. Nope, it still doesn't matter. Let's see, Ubuntu. Yeah, see, if I do Ubuntu, we'll just call it Ubuntu Linux 2, okay? That way it chooses the right type of Linux for you, all right? But it'll do Gen 2, Mandri, it's got its own in there. Or you could always do Linux 2x, 3x, 4x, 64-bit. Your mileage might vary. But I'll just use the one that they include with Ubuntu. We'll see how that works out. So we'll click Next. I'm going to give this machine 4 gig of RAM. I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual disk now. I'm going to do a VDI. Let's just accept the defaults. Dynamically allocated. And I typically give my virtual machines my Linux virtual machines about 50 or 60 gig hard drive. So I'll go ahead and click on Create, and that's not the end of it. Now that I've created this virtual machine, I need to go into the settings and change some of them, and I'll explain to you why. So now that I've created the virtual machine, I'm going to go into the settings, and I can just right-click on the virtual machine, go into settings, and I'm going to, the first thing I'm going to do is changes under System. I'm going to give it 4 processors, and I'm going to enable PAE NX. Then we come down to Display, and I want to make sure I've got 128 meg of RAM and enable 3D acceleration. Come down to Storage, and this is where you'll see that here's our hard drive. It's a serial ATA, and here's an empty CD-ROM controller. So what you need to do is make sure you download your ISO that you're going to want to install, put that into a folder. In my case, I put it on my D drive in a folder called ISOs, so I'm going to choose the virtual optical disk, and you'll see I have several versions of Linux in here. I'm going to choose Ubuntu 18.04, and I'm going to open it. So now it's attached. Then the last thing you need to change is here under Network, and change that to Bridged Adapter. Now, coming back, you may also want to, under Advanced, go to the General option and then go to the Advanced tab and enable your bidirectional clipboard and drag and drop. Now that's not going to work out of the box. Once you get your Linux installed, then you'll need to install the VirtualBox guest editions. So now that I've got everything set up, got the name for it, you can put a description in here if you want to. I'm giving it 4 CPUs, enabled PAE, giving it 128 meg of video RAM, and enabled 3D acceleration. We've attached our CD-ROM drive, and we changed our networking to bridged. You can leave that in NAT, but I just find it's easier for my virtual machines to be on the same subnet as my main network. And now all I'm going to do is go ahead and click on OK. And so the next thing I want to do is we're going to go ahead and go through an install of Ubuntu just to show you what it looks like. So we'll get started with that next. Now, I had not planned to do an install, but what the heck, right? I might as well show you soup to nuts. So I got a couple options. If I double click on this machine, it'll just start up automatically. And you'll see it'll start up in a window here. And probably your screen size is going to be very small, like mine is. We'll see. Sometimes the installer can detect that you're running on a virtual machine and it will resize the screen properly. Sometimes it won't. Now I'm going to be doing a very basic install and creating a user, and the beauty of Linux now is it kind of runs you through that. It has a little wizard that pops up similar to Windows 10. You can hear we had some audio there. Let's see if I can no, it's got it set on auto resize, so hopefully that'll work. But I'm going to go ahead. We have two options here. This is a live CD, so I could try Ubuntu or I could install. I'm going to go ahead and install Ubuntu. And a US keyboard. And we're going to do a normal installation. Now, let's go back real quick. Normally on a machine you were installing on a physical machine, you'd install your third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware and additional media formats. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Select that here. Your mileage might vary though. It will take a little bit longer to do the install because it's going to have to go out and download drivers, but that's fine. Now it's asking me what I want to do with the hard drive because it currently is detected no operating system. So I'm going to just choose erase the disk and install Ubuntu automatically. I could use LVM. LVM will allow you to use what's called logical volume management. It allows you to take snapshots within Ubuntu and allows for easier partition resizing. But since we're in a virtual machine, I really don't care about that. I'm just going to accept the default here, erase disk and install Ubuntu. Because with VirtualBox we can also do snapshotting, which we'll do after we get it installed. So go ahead and click on install now. And it tells you it's going to create a couple of different, or it's going to create one large partition. It's not going to create a swap disk. I don't know if the days of swap are over on Linux or not, but a lot of the installers I've seen in installing them on a hard drive, they don't set up a swap partition anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and click on continue. I'm going to choose my time zone, and actually I'm closer to Chicago than I am New York. And I'm going to go ahead and type in my name. My machine name, so we'll call this Ubuntu 2, and I'm going to use the same login name that I use on my Active Directory domain network and the same password, just because I like to keep all this stuff consistent. That way if I just look up at the screen, boom, I'll know what I need to type in. And then I always require my password to log in. I want to keep it secure. Okay, so now we'll let the install run. That should be all the information it needs to me. It's going to take you through a little slideshow presentation and tell you what kind of features it has and that kind of thing while it's installing. So we're going to let this go ahead and run, and then I'll come back when something more interesting happens. So while the install is running, I just want to, I'm sure a lot of you are asking, well, why don't you use Windows 10? The Hyper-V built into Windows 10 to do your virtual machines. Well, I could, but really Hyper-V is really geared toward server operating systems and not workstation operating systems, certainly not Linux workstation operating systems. I just find that VirtualBox is easier to use and gives me quite a few more bells and whistles than I would get if I were using Hyper-V. It can be done, but the interface would be clunky, and no, I'd just rather stick with VirtualBox, and that's what I would recommend you do if you're just getting started out. So we'll let the installer continue on. Alright, so it looks like the install was complete. That's what it's telling me on the screen anyway, so we'll click on Restart Now. Okay, now it's telling us to please make sure we remove the installation medium, then hit then reboot. So I'm going to go up here to Devices, and there should not be an image in there. That's one of the nice things about VirtualBox is it knows that to eject the CD at the end of the installation. Now it says to choose Reboot, but I'm going to hit Enter. That didn't work, so I'm going to go ahead and do Machine, and I'm going to do Reset. And now it should boot off of its own virtual hard drive, and it looks like it's doing that. It's probably not the best way to restart Linux, but it didn't give me any other options. So sometimes it'll tell you to hit the Enter key after you remove the CD or the boot media, and then it will reboot on its own, but no big deal. Now hopefully this will come up and enter into full screen. I hope. Perhaps not. So I'll go ahead and log in with the username and password we created. Go ahead and click on Sign In. And hopefully I'll hear the startup sound if there is one. Okay, and then we're presented with the Ubuntu desktop, and then it takes us through explaining what everything is. This is the, I believe they call this the Unity desktop. I'm not a big fan. I'm just gonna, and here is help improve Ubuntu. This is what people were saying. Hey, Ubuntu tracks you too. Well, it's real simple. They tell you right up front, and I'm going to tell them no, I don't want to share, and then I'm going to be done. Now, I doubt I can go. Sometimes turning that off and turning it back on. Bingo, that did it. So now I've got full screen. So now that I've got Ubuntu up and running, I want to take a snapshot. So it's very easy to do in Ubuntu Linux. You go to up here to Machine and take a snapshot. Give it a name. I'll call it Initial Boot Up. The reason I do snapshot, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and you'll see a little identifier will come up, tell you it's saving the machine state. So that's one of the benefits of using VirtualBox, is you can do these live snapshots. They come in real handy. That way, if I screw anything up real bad, I can. And now you notice the update. It tells me there are updates. So now's the perfect time to go ahead and do my updates. So if I click on Details of Updates, it'll tell me all the items it's going to update. And since I've got a snapshot, I should be good. So I'll go ahead and install now on the updates. And it should tell me, oh, it's going to ask for my permission. It's another thing about Linux. It will constantly ask you for your permission. I'm sure there is a way to put that in there automatically, but from a security standpoint, I choose to be asked. It's the same thing OS X does now. Anytime you go to install software or anything, and it asks you to verify it by putting your password in. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and let the updates run. There's nothing indicating they're running here. Yes there is, I lied. Over here on the left you can see Software Updater is running, and then I can even click on the details and it'll tell me what it's downloading and doing in the background. So we'll let this run, we'll let the update run, and we'll come back when something significant changes. Alright, so just like Windows, our Software Updater is complete and wants to restart to finish installing updates. So we'll go ahead and click on Restart Now, and all kinds of wonderful stuff will happen. So, but now you can see why I prefer to use VirtualBox for doing Linux installs on in a virtual machine. Just easier to use, and Linux frankly seems to run pretty darn well from my experience so far, in a virtual machine. It's very similar to, well, it's not as good as a physical machine. Nothing is. Let's just be clear on that. But it's as close to a really good experience I would get on a physical machine, other than video editing, which you wouldn't want to do on a virtual machine anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my super secret password. And VirtualBox is smart enough to remember that we wanted to do full screen last time, so it's going to give us full screen again. Now, I don't see the update program over here anymore. That's fine. It'll pop up and let me know if there are any more updates. But I believe we can go into it by clicking on this little dotted menu here to show applications. And there's the icon for software update. So let's click on that again. Just make sure there aren't any more updates out there. Now, right off the back, I'm going to tell you, I do not prefer the Unity desktop. I just think it's kind of ugly. It's customizable. You know, that's the thing about Linux. It's everything under Linux is customizable. All right, so we're good. Our software on this computer is up to date. So now what I want to do is I'm going to take another snapshot. So I'm going to come here to machine and go take snapshot, and I'm going to go after Ubuntu updates, and I'm going to click on OK. And that should take me to another snapshot of the machine. And then let's go up, and I don't know if we can view our snapshots. No, I don't think we can. No, but we'll view our snapshots after we're done with the next step that I want to do. Now, in order for Ubuntu or any Linux or any workstation operating system to run well under VirtualBox, you should load the guest editions CDs or CD. And this is where we start to find that Linux does not work like Windows does. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Just depends on the flavor you're using. Now, I'm supposed to be able to come up here to Devices, insert the guest edition CD, wait for it to appear on the desktop, and then it should ask me, just like this, contains software intended to be automatically started. Would you like to run it? That's what it should do on all Linux versions, but it doesn't. It does it on Ubuntu, and I'll tell you later as we get into operating systems the other ones it does it on. And of course it wants me to authenticate. And then I'm just going to let the installer run the modules, and it even tells you running kernel modules will not be replaced until the system is restarted. And then I can stretch my screen out here, just like you can under Windows. Don't let Linux intimidate you. It's click, double click, single click. They got the minimize, the maximize, and the X buttons. Some derivations of Linux put it over here. It just depends on which operating system you're running. Okay, so it's done. So it says press return to close this window. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reboot the machine. And you go ahead, you just come up here to the power button, click the power button, and choose restart. And then we'll let it boot, and then it should have the VirtualBox guest editions loaded and running. And then we'll take another snapshot just to make sure that we have a point in time snapshot of the system. So if something gets screwed up, we can fix it without having to reload the operating system. But Ubuntu, I will tell you, all the Linux installs I've done so far, the installer is very quick. Of course, it's a lot lighter. You know, I think the full-blown image on Ubuntu is 1.7 gig. On Windows 10, it's gotten up to 6 gig now, I think, was the last download I did. It's a 6 gig. DVDs aren't that big. No, maybe it's only 4.5 gig. I can't remember. It was a whopper, though. Now, you notice our VirtualBox Guest Edition CD is still installed there, so we can just right-click on it and eject it. And then it should throw it out of the system. So if we come here to optical drives, you'll see there's nothing in there. It's grayed out. So good, it's done. So now we have all of our add-ins, our VirtualBox Guest Editions. So I'm going to go up there and click on Machine and click on Take Snapshot. And I'll just call this VBox guest install. Okay, I'll know what that means. Go ahead and click on OK. Let it take another snapshot. And it looks like it threw me out. It says aborted. Aborted. Well, let's double click and see what's going on. I don't like doing it live, huh? Yeah, and you see it did not, anytime you see that clearing orphan inode, it means your operating system did not shut down properly. But just like Windows 10, for the most part, if the machine gets shut down improperly or gets turned off, you're going to generally be okay. If one of the system files in Windows gets screwed up, it'll rebuild it. I'll go ahead and do this full screen again. It'll go ahead and rebuild the file as needed. I don't know if I can say the same about Linux. But that's interesting. We did the VirtualBox guest editions, and the system crashed when trying to take a snapshot. And it looks like this is why we take the snapshots, though. This is the very reason. Linux is still kind of squirrely. It's not. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're not prepared to do a little work, don't bother using Linux, because it's a completely different way of doing things. It's a good way of doing things. Don't let me smash on whatchamacallit on Linux. But let's go to the software updater and see that if it detects, since we did those VirtualBox add-ins, if it's going to find any additional files that need to be installed. Nope, it's up to date. So I think we got a problem with the guest add-ins. I could try doing a snapshot one more time. And I'm going to go click on OK. Remember, it got about, what, 96%, then it crashed Ubuntu. Okay, well, great. We know that doesn't work. I'm going to go ahead and restart the machine and then shut it down normally. And we'll try to do an offline snapshot. Not that we want a snapshot of a system that's crashing, come to think of it. And there we go. It's cleaning up the orphan files again. You should avoid that, powering off your operating system without actually shutting it down properly. But it's not the end of the world usually if that happens. So, but something got foobarred, and you can see I would have to then go out to the internets or the interwebs and try to do a search for why the heck that is going on. They release updates every other day for Linux, it seems, and even for VirtualBox for that matter. So getting the right mix of things together so that VirtualBox will run and Linux will run under it sometimes is a science or an art more than it is a science. Okay, well, this is supposed to be a beaver, I think. Yeah, there's the eye, there's a little hook tooth, and there's a fat little beaver body and its little feet. So I believe this version of Linux is called Bionic Beaver. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shut down this operating system. Power it off. Just to show you. Now, so that was Ubuntu Linux 2 we were running. So we could come over here to our snapshots. There you go. So here's our first snapshot, initial boot up after install Ubuntu updates and in the current state. So let's try to take a snapshot now, and we'll go guest editions. Tell it OK, and it seems to be creating a snapshot. Okay, well, let's hope it was successful. Trying to click on properties. I probably should have waited till that was done. But looks like we're good here. So there you go. That's how you set up VirtualBox on your PC, and how you set up a template for your for your virtual machine. And we even walked through a really simple Ubuntu Linux install, and I showed you how to install the guest edition CD. So if you want to follow along with this series, go ahead and do what I did in this video, get it installed and start getting your feet wet with Linux. I would recommend you do this on an i3 multi-core processor or above. Make sure you have your virtualization enabled in your BIOS, and make sure you have plenty of RAM and a good size hard drive to put your virtual machines on. I wouldn't put them on an SSD unless you want that virtual machine to be really fast. Usually a spinning hard drive is fine for the virtual machines. Alright, so as a side note, as we embark on this Linux journey, if you've never used Linux before, don't be afraid of it. That's item number one. Is it stable enough to run day-to-day on your desktop? We're going to find out. I hear from people it is. I have no reason to think it wouldn't be. I mean, everything else I've got running on Linux is rock solid. So as long as you stick with a stable version of an operating system, and I'll make sure when I show you these operating systems that I'll tell you the difference between a stable and a beta and a development edition, because it's real easy to get confused. And that's part of Linux's problem right now, is there's so many different flavors, so many different, people hear Linux and they just get fearful. They don't care whether it's XCF. It's too much technical knowledge for most people. Now you're going to find as you move into the Linux world, you're going to hit up what I call the fanboy base. You're going to have a lot of people singing Linux praise, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I've already had people in the comments section saying things like, well, you're new to Linux. You're obviously not watching the entire videos. I've said multiple times that I've been running Linux for 20 plus years. I have clients that run Linux. I've used every derivation of every version of every Linux you can imagine in the last 20 years. And that's why I'm still on Windows, because I just came to feel that Linux was never ready for prime time. What this series of videos is about is that the paradigm has changed. And now I think it is a very good time for Linux. And I think if, as a group, Linux people could get together and standardize the operating system and the desktop, they would make greater inroads into the Windows and corporate America world. Now, I'm just saying that from the standpoint of being a small business owner. Yeah, I want to save money, but I know Microsoft works, and if I pay money for Microsoft, I know they're going to be there to support it. One of the big problems with Linux is who's going to support it. And I think that's one of the benefits of Linux now offering support. Don't sell the operating system because, it's free and open source, but you can certainly sell your support. So I think that's also a good direction. But you're going to run into these fanboys that nothing you say or do is ever going to be good enough for them. You're not installing it the right way. You're not using it the right way. Oh, you're not telling people about this desktop feature. You're not. Well, this is not going to be a deep dive into Linux. This is going to be just your average Unky Joe's perspective of Linux and how I use it in as my daily driver in my daily environment. I leave all that superfluous stuff to the fan base out there for Linux. Go out there and look for Linux videos on YouTube. There are a ton of them, and there's some really good people out there making really good videos. And down in the comments section, I'll be putting links to some of those people and their YouTube channels, because I like sharing my knowledge, and I got my knowledge from these people by watching how they did it. So that's what I think this community is about sharing. So that's why I do these videos on YouTube. But remember, when it comes to Linux, your mileage might vary. So we hope you found the video entertaining and informative. There's more Linux videos to come. Let's come back and see us again. Donate if you're so inclined. We take PayPal, Patreon. Please smash that like button, subscribe, and notify, because I want to make sure that YouTube is notifying my loyal subscriber base that is growing by leaps and bounds every day. Thank you so much. That I want to make sure you all get informed of the new videos when they come up. So the other thing, if you subscribe, I get put in that window to the left in your list of subscribers, and it's real easy to see if I've had an update. So thanks again for joining us. Come back and see us again real soon as we get more videos out, that is. And don't forget that we will see you on the other side.